Good morning and welcome to one in a series of webinars hosted by BlueSource and welcoming Corrent. So we've got you for the next 45 minutes or so, and welcome if you're listening to this on a recording. There are many good reasons why moving to the cloud can bring value to you and your organization, from flexibility, like working from home, scalability, by being able to easily add additional capacity, then turn this off, and of course, a wider range of options in cloud computing from SaaS, IaaS, PaaS to deliver what your business needs, agility. Google X talks about and uses the phrase fail quickly and move on. But in most instances, these workloads and that move to the cloud must not fail. Business and careers are dependent on success. Today, we're going to look into Azure in more detail, discuss some of the challenges and how we can help. We'll attempt to detail some of the challenges around spiraling and unchecked cost issues, poor setup and performance issues, lack of clear visibility of what's going on in the cloud, what's being used, not accessed, timelines, etc., and how you deal with the continuous addition of new cloud services. For those of you not understanding of what BlueSource does and our partnership, so BlueSource helps solve the issue of unconstrained cloud usage with regards to controls, visibility, poor understanding of how workloads run in the cloud. Our partnership with Current Technology allows our clients to solve the issues around managing cloud infrastructure whilst maintaining service levels and cost management automation. The impact of these allows our clients to have a full 360 view of all services in the cloud, which allows repeatable cost savings each month, with future accurate predictability aligned with continuous improvements delivered with a single click. We've been doing this for the last 20 years globally, with our expertise around compliance and governance on-premise, and more recently moving cloud and hybrid environments for some of the largest and most complex organizations of the planet. And with the current emergency, organizations are reviewing how they deliver software and services to their end users and clients. We passionately believe BlueSource and our partnership with Current has never been more relevant. In this webinar, Via Mercer and Jeremy Neal will discuss why these ubiquitous problems occur and the reasons why it's been so difficult to solve. We'll provide some practical steps you can take right now to answer the questions of how do we control costs and make services better. With me today, I have got Vim Mercer, Principal BlueSource Consultant for Azure, with 17 years in the IT industry and 8 years recently at BlueSource. Vim has worked with a variety of organizations over that time, helping them to understand cloud service capabilities and where they fit into their business and enhance their IT services landscape. I also have Jeremy Neal. Jeremy is the UK manager for Current Technology, a software company specializing in all aspects of the cloud journey, from assessment and migration through to ongoing optimization and modernization. Jeremy has 30 years industry experience, the last 12 of which have been exclusively cloud related. Jeremy's built cloud businesses and knows what it takes to make the most of on-premise and cloud assets working side by side. And myself, John Ford, director here at BlueSource, too many years in this industry, having spent time at Microsoft and the security organization Symantec, now Broadcom, and the data management company Veritas. So what are we going to cover today? Cloud infrastructure challenges, how to build cost-efficient Azure workloads, and how to standardize workloads. Vim's going to cover those, and Jeremy's going to cover off the Surpass technology within the Current Technologies portfolio. And I'll hopefully wrap up and summarize at the end. So Vim, without further ado, welcome, and over to yourself.
Thanks, John, and welcome along, everyone. So I'd like to take the next few minutes to talk a little bit about our experiences with Azure and how we're helping our clients in this space. So as we go through the next few sections, I'd like you to ponder 4 things. So 1, how are you currently keeping track of your cloud spend? How are you ensuring that each workload you deploy is deployed in a consistent manner? How are you ensuring that you have a predictable cloud bill at the end of each month? And how are you optimizing that deployment and management approach? So public cloud infrastructure is really well established now. It's been around for over a decade. And although some organizations are yet to dive into public cloud for a whole host of reasons, many organizations have really made that move, at least in part. Some of the usual blockers we hear are around concerns for cost, security, compliance, sometimes even complexity. And hopefully we can start to address some of those concerns as we go through this session today. Lots of organizations do, however, start using that cloud infrastructure as a bit of a playground. They'll throw a few virtual machines up there, see what they can do. Maybe they'll move some low impact workloads, and it tends to grow organically. Each engineer that's using it may use a slightly different method to deploy those workloads, and so you end up with a non-standardized solution or system in some cases. And also don't forget that one of the big drivers and benefits of public cloud infrastructure is that you don't necessarily have to limit the deployment rights to the IT administrators. So it could be in-house developers or maybe your partner organizations. You're giving them rights to deploy resources where needed. And so cost control as well as security and compliance becomes even more important to make sure you're on top of. You know, as our devs and admins alike, we're all going to find scripts off public repos, maybe GitHub, something like that. Nothing wrong with doing that, but sometimes these scripts, or they will have default parameters and variables. They may not comply with our standard deployment processes, and they're going to go and deploy a whole bunch of resources, maybe some VMs, maybe some app services, storage accounts. It's going to go across lots of different resource groups, possibly, and generally across different regions. And as I said, maybe that's not always in accordance with our in-house guidelines and how we typically deploy services. So what? Well, why is that really an issue? Well, what we tend to end up with in a typical Azure environment is a whole bunch of different resource groups, a whole bunch of different naming conventions, and there's no real consistency in how these have been deployed. So some users are going to deploy into existing virtual networks, some maybe into their own dedicated virtual networks, some may use security groups attached to virtual machines, some at the subnet, some maybe not at all. And you can see here I've got no real naming convention. There's one set of naming going on over here. In the middle we've got a whole other set of naming conventions, and over here another set as well. Now the problem with this is that the different engineers or consultants or whoever is accessing this estate doesn't necessarily know what everyone else has been doing. So it becomes a little bit more difficult to manage in that sense. So on top of that, we tend to find orphan resources lying about, which can rack up costs each month. So I mean, taking our previous example of that script that we may deploy, let's say it provisioned 40 virtual machines. Each one of those is going to have at least one disk. If we now go and delete one or more of those virtual machines, the system does just that. It's going to delete the virtual machine resource and only the virtual machine resource. The network interface, the disks, the public IPs, all of those resources don't necessarily get deleted at the same time. Now that is desirable and good in some circumstances because it decouples the compute from the rest of the resources. So we've got a lot of flexibility around rebuilds, recovery, portability. But if your goal is to clean up that environment, maybe as part of your testing cycle or maybe as part of lifecycle management, then of course it's very easy to leave orphan resources lying around. They can go unnoticed for some time, and it's not really uncommon to find disks which cost several £100s a month just sitting in an unattached state. Nobody really knows they're there. When you start to add all these things up, the cost savings that can be realized by continually monitoring and optimizing that environment can be substantial over the months and the years that you're running the solution. So what's the fix for this? So we use a combination of techniques and tool sets to ensure that the solutions that we build in Azure are, first of all, right-sized, secure and efficient from day one, all the way from design through to delivery, but they also remain cost optimized, secure and compliant throughout their life cycle. So we're going to talk about these in a bit more detail as we go through this section, but to give you a high level overview, we start with workload analysis. So we review given workloads, apply what we call R-lane theory to make informed decisions as to how we migrate those workloads to the cloud. So it could be to SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a little while. We also then optimize the virtual machine sizing and decide between traditional VMs or containers, Kubernetes, all of those good things. So I'm not going to go into detail really around today around the migration theory. Happy to discuss that in more detail on a one-to-one basis. Give us a shout after this and we can go through that. But once our services are in the cloud, or maybe as part of a launch design or something like that, we would then use things such as management groups. So these are groups of subscriptions that we can apply a common set of policies to. And then resource groups. And these will allow us to group several resources together to allow us to optimize the admin, the resource lifecycle management, and of course, access control. We then use ARM templates, which help us ensure a nice standardized delivery mechanism. This is actually where we can start to discuss some of the advanced techniques, such as infrastructure as code. And that's really going to allow us to standardize the delivery mechanism, which is going to ultimately help with our cost control. Policies enable us to scan a set of resources against security and compliance baselines. There's a whole bunch of other stuff it can do as well. Resource tagging is then used for reporting and maybe targeting resources through custom scripts and that sort of stuff. And then we wrap all of that up into a blueprint to give us a nice deployable standardized package. And then arguably the most important piece of the puzzle is continuous optimization. So we take all of those concepts, all of those functions and deliverables, and then we scan, analyze, report and remediate on a regular basis to make sure that the platform is nice and healthy throughout its life cycle. So I'd like to dip in and cover those in a little bit more detail now. So as I mentioned earlier, the webinar is not really around migration to the cloud. This is focused more or less on the optimization once in the cloud. So I'm not going to deep dive into migrating workloads today, but I did think it would be prudent to give you a little bit of an overview and some of our tips around how we approach that. We will be running additional webinars in future to kind of dip into this in a bit more detail. So I mentioned earlier, we use a combination of tooling as well as our own in-house expertise to analyze an existing estate. Now that could be on premises, could be private cloud, could even be public cloud. We use a tool set provided to us by Current Technology. It's called Surpaz. Jeremy Neal is going to be on stage later on to discuss those capabilities in a bit more detail. So I'm not going to steal his thunder. I'm going to keep my bit fairly lightish. But what we do is we gather audit information on the infrastructure assets. So we collect details such as the operating system type, CPU, memory, disk allocations, and of course the utilization metrics, both from a snapshot, so a point in time perspective, but also an elapsed time data set. That allows us to make sure that we can provide appropriate recommendations based on the specific workload in question. We're then going to generate some reports which have embedded cost modeling to show our recommendations for a cloud strategy. So there's two main elements to that. The first one is that we can provide a cost calculation for a simple lift and shift migration, no problem at all. But actually the real value is being able to provide a comparison, so a cost comparison around optimizing or modernizing the infrastructure, either as we migrate or maybe after we migrate. And that's going to enable us to use cloud native services such as DB as a service or maybe containers. And we apply that R-lane theory that I mentioned earlier in our decision matrix around making those recommendations. And then we use the same Surpaz platform to orchestrate and execute those migrations efficiently. So what do I mean by R-lane theory? Well, we can rehost the service. So that's a simple lift and shift migration of one or many servers to a cloud infrastructure. We can replatform. I like to think of this as a lift and shift with a twist. So we could replace maybe the database with a DB as a service. We could merge several app servers into one instance to reduce costs and optimize. All of those good things come under the replatform banner. We could repurchase. So this is usually replacing services with a software as a service alternative. So think of this like an exchange to an exchange online as an example. We could refactor. This is usually a redesign of an application. typically involves development time. And so in our experience, this is typically an in-house application that the in-house dev teams will recode, and then we would support the infrastructure components of that on how to host it in an Azure environment. Then of course we could just retain the service, so a service that doesn't necessarily need to be moved or can't be moved for whatever reason, or maybe it's due for retirement at some point soon, and so we're just going to delay that decision point and retain the service. And then the final one is retire. So self-explanatory, but we can simply turn the service off if it's no longer needed. And we do see in some organizations as much as 5, maybe 10% of servers or apps that can be retired in some cases. So every organization is slightly different. So that was a quick overview on our workload analysis piece and how to migrate to the cloud. Now we move into the management on the cloud. So what we're going to do here is build up the concepts as we go and give you a working example. So I'm going to fire up a pseudo whiteboard and we're going to build this out. So the first thing is the management groups. So again, management groups are simply a hierarchical collection of subscriptions. So why bother? Why would we even worry about this? Well, depending on your organization, you may have one or you may have many subscriptions. The largest I've personally worked on is 150 subs, and that's a lot of subscriptions to manage. So for the organization that only has a single sub, management groups aren't really adding any benefits, so you don't really need them. But where you've got multiple subscriptions, we can apply policies and access control at the management group level. So maybe, for example, we want to limit the virtual machine sizes that can be deployed into a specific environment, you know, to make sure we don't get a massive bill at the end of the month because someone decided they wanted to try one of those MV2 series VMs, which cost you 12 grand a month. We can use a single policy initiative across all subscriptions at the management group level, rather than having to create multiple policies and assign them individually at multiple locations. So we're going to save time there and ultimately administrative cost. Underneath that, we will then build out our resource groups. So for want of a better phrase, these are really just containers to hold a bunch of resources. And there isn't really any one right answer on how to build these. Each environment is slightly different. However, I tend to find if you ensure that you combine resources that share the same life cycle in a single resource group, then this is going to ease your administrative overhead as the service grows. And of course, it's going to reduce the chances of leaving orphaned resources behind when you're deleting services. So in my example here, I've got the networks resource group down there in the middle of the screen. I've combined all my network resources because you're not really going to be deleting those very often. And then over on the left-hand side, I've got my Delphi application resource group over here. And all of my resources that are related to that application sit in that resource group, which means when the application needs to be deleted or decommissioned, I can simply delete the resource group and I know that I'm not going to leave any orphaned resources behind. Then we deploy or define our tags. So resource tags are going to enable us to easily identify resources that may be spread across different resource groups or even regions. We can use these for all sorts of things. Typically, they're used for reporting, either by application, business unit, maybe status, something like that. And it could be cost reporting, or we could then be targeting resources through custom scripts to do perform certain functions, which leads then into policies. So Azure policy has gone through some pretty good and hefty changes recently. We've got access to a whole bunch of security and compliance related policy definitions right out the box. We tend to exploit those through continuous optimization, which we'll talk about later. And some of these policies which I've got on the screen here are for reporting purposes only. So here I'm saying all resources should have a tag. So if they don't, I want an alert. All of my storage accounts should be enabled for secure transfers. So anytime the system identifies a resource that violates those policies, we're going to get an alert. We could take an appropriate action. And then there are also deployment policies, which I haven't shown here, but they're going to evaluate a resource against the policy definition and take an appropriate action. So it could be deploy the log analytics agent extension if it's not installed. And I tend to find these really useful in my client deployments. They're going to automate lots of tasks that I just don't want to have to do manually. So again, this just give you a bit of a flavour, but there's lots of pre-canned policies available, and we do have the ability to create our own custom ones. So the possibilities are really endless. But the policies allow us to keep a nice tight control on system configuration. Not only going to help from a security and compliance perspective, but it also enables us to deliver a nice predictable cost model because we know what's being deployed and how it's being deployed. And then what we do is we wrap all of that up into a blueprint. So we take resource groups, we take the ARM templates, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. We take role assignments, which are a way of granting or denying access to resources. And we take the policies, we wrap them all up together into a blueprint. And that way we can ensure that we are deploying the same set of resources in the same way, time and again. So the next topic I'd like to discuss then is around templating. So this is quite a subjective subject really, because different organizations are going to have different ideas on the level of standardization they need. My view personally is that the more we standardize and automate, the easier the services are going to be to manage, troubleshoot, and potentially then recover if there is a disaster. So I am a massive advocate for both automation and standardization. I think most of us are familiar with procedural policies, at least when it comes to infrastructure. So most organizations will have some form of build guide that they use. Maybe it's even an informal one that's handed down to engineers, but it could be build a server, must have anti-malware, must be joined to the domain, must be configured to a specific network. Maybe it's got a secondary network card for replication or backup or whatever it is, but you get the idea. Now these ideas still apply to cloud infrastructure, of course they do, but templates give us a way of automating those build requirements. So ultimately we're going to save time and cost by deploying templates. There are lots of templating tools out there. Ones that spring to mind are Terraform, and they tend to work across platform. So if you're in Azure and AWS and maybe GCP, you can use these generic templating tools, absolutely. The one I'm talking about today is the Azure Resource Manager, or the ARM template, which is built into Azure itself. These templates allow you to define a set of resources and deploy them into a resource group using JSON code. And it's to get a nice simple template is not that bad. So you don't have to be a full-on a full stack developer to be able to make use of these templates. We can define parameters, we can define variables in those templates to allow us to reuse those over and over again to deploy resources in a nice standardized way. So for example, you might have a template that deploys several virtual networks. It's going to deploy the security groups, the routing tables, maybe a firewall alongside. So why is that important? Who cares about that? Why don't we just deploy stuff through the Azure portal? Well, you absolutely can, and the portal will result in a similar configuration. The only thing to watch out for is when you're deploying through the portal, you can't always control every aspect of the deployment. So as an example, in some cases, the naming conventions aren't always honored. And of course, if you've gone to the trouble of building out a set of naming conventions, you really should stick to those naming conventions. And then of course, if you're manually deploying resources all the time, it is open to interpretation in some cases, and possibly human error. So one area that springs to mind, which I've been working on recently, is Windows Virtual Desktop. If you deploy Windows Virtual Desktop through the portal, it doesn't honor your naming conventions for all of the resources that it deploys. And so typically what I do is build out a set of templates for my clients, and then they can use those templates to deploy the Windows Virtual Desktop machines and configuration. That's going to ensure we are adhering to their naming conventions, and of course it's going to be secure and compliant based on their requirements. And to my point earlier, different organizations do have different wants and needs. So although my recommendation is to weave ARM templates into any deployment approach, how you develop and consume those can be in many different ways. The whole topic is really labeled as infrastructure as code, but I don't want to scare anyone off. It doesn't have to be development heavy. It doesn't have to be all singing, all dancing. We can take bits of that and really allow it to help us in our deployment efforts. So to give you a couple of examples, at one end of the scale, for those organizations that need a way of deploying the same set of resources in the same way many times over, the DevOps approach is generally the way to go. Now, you could use Microsoft's Azure DevOps pipelines, or maybe a tool set such as Jenkins, Puppet, Ansible. There's a whole raft of them out there, and they're all good for certain scenarios. Whatever tool you select, though, you would typically build out your core templates. You check the code into some sort of source control, and then you would deploy through a continuous integration, continuous deployment, or CI/CD pipeline. And that ensures that any changes you need to make to that infrastructure can be updated in the pipeline, governed through source control, and delivered across all of your infrastructure at the same time, which is extremely powerful and ensures security and compliance is maintained at all times. At the other end of the scale, let's say all your organization needs is to be able to deploy Azure resources in a nice standard way as different projects arise across the business. I would still use templates, but I'd forego the DevOps piece. Simply maintain a set of templates, maybe even keep those in the Azure portal if you want to, and deploy them from there when and as and when you need to. So this means that as your platform grows and maybe you want to expand out to a new region, for example, instead of having to follow build guides and spend hours, possibly days, building out a new region and infrastructure, you can simply execute one or many templates and have a nice standard build delivered quickly and efficiently. You've already done all the hard work. You've built the templates. You can just now use them to execute that infrastructure. You still want to be using strict version control to make sure that you're not ending up deploying old configuration, but it is a nice, easy approach to take. So I want to show you a quick example of that in action. So we're going to do a quick demo. Head over to the Azure portal. And in here, we've built out some templates. So let's go and head over to the templates blade. And you can see there's a whole bunch of templates in here. The one I'm interested in is the webinar demo template. So let's open that up. Let's clear out some space. There we go. And so this template is going to build us a hub and spoke virtual network. It's going to create the network security groups. It's going to create some routing, and it will join the whole thing together. The template is built using JSON format. So I'm not going to go through how to build templates today, but you can see I've got some names and IP schema in there, all of that good stuff. So when we want to deploy it, we just simply click on the deploy button and fill out some information. So the first thing we want to select is our subscription, and that's going to tell us where which subscription it's going to deploy to. We'll pick a resource group. You could create a new one, but in this example, I'm going to pick one that I've pre-created, webinar networks. So let's select that, and that will automatically select the location or the region for us. And then we want to select our parameters. So in this case, I've only got one parameter or setting, which is the location or region. I'm setting that to the same as the resource group, which follows my best practices. Then we want to click to agree to the terms and conditions. Of course, you'll read all of those terms and conditions first, and then click on the purchase button. So it's not actually going to charge me to deploy the resources, but depending on the resources that you do deploy, you may get charged for the resources that are deployed. So once that's going, we can go and head over to the deployment progress and check on how it's doing. So I normally do deploy these templates using PowerShell, but a lot of my clients aren't familiar with PowerShell and they want to use the portal to do it. We can see here we've got a whole bunch of resources set up. We've got our virtual networks, our subnets, and all that good stuff. Let's give that a couple more minutes to finish. There we go, and we can then head over to the resources and have a look. And here's all of our resources. Actually, that's not all of our resources. Let's quickly refresh the screen. And that's all of our resources. So we've got some virtual networks, we've got some network security groups, and we've got some routing tables. So let's have a look at a virtual network. And we'll go ahead and look at the subnets. And there we go. There's a few subnets in there with the IP addresses or IP ranges that we would expect. Let's have a quick look at a subnet. We can see the network security group has been assigned automatically, and we've assigned some of the service endpoints as well. So all of this has been pre-configured for us. Let's head back and we'll have a quick look at the network security group. And this is pretty standard. There's not too much going on in here, but I've created a couple of custom rules in here. I wouldn't normally recommend using any rules, but this is just to give you an idea of what you can do. So the power is that we've created all of this automatically. We've even set up a tag assignment. So in our development environment, we've added a tag created by me. We're going to put a lock on it for do not delete. It's part of the IT cost center, provisioned today, and it's part of the network's application stack. Because we've configured all of that in our template, we just had to go and deploy it, and off it goes. It's created everything for us automatically. So that's really the power of using ARM templates in your deployment approach. So let's go and head back over to the slide deck, and we will carry on with that. So at this point, you may be thinking, I've gone way off piste. This has got nothing to do with cost control, and you know, what's going on? Well, actually, my whole point around this is that by automating the deployment of workloads in a nice standardized way, we're reducing the ongoing administrative costs, and we're ensuring that there's a predictable deployment and operating cost going forward. We're going to know what types of resources are being deployed, how they're being configured, and how they're being deployed and where they're being deployed. It's not only that, but by using those templates, they would have gone through, hopefully, a design decision point process and been signed off as secure and compliant based on business requirements. So we can ensure that any future deployments also remain nice and secure, nice and compliant. And then by making changes when needed to those core templates and redeploying, we're ensuring that all of our infrastructure remains in sync throughout its entire lifecycle. And so this brings us to the last point that I wanted to cover today around continuous optimization. So I mentioned earlier in this session, ensuring a healthy, cost-efficient and optimized platform is, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of cloud infrastructure management. So let's be honest, we all start projects with the best of intentions. Day one, life is great. We've built a nice new shiny service, we've documented it to the nth degree, and we've handed it over to the ops team. Fast forward a few weeks, maybe some tweaks have been done to the configuration. Maybe we've had a few virtual machines that we've needed to replace or swap out. Maybe we've had to redeploy one or more of them. Any number of changes could have happened. How many times does the configuration reference documentation get updated to reflect every single change? Now, some organizations do this really well, and some maybe not so well. We all know where we are on that scale. But even putting that aside, what if Microsoft release new virtual machine sizes? What if new best practices are released? What if new security alerts or regulatory compliance requirements come out that we need to comply with? Keeping up to date with all these things is a full-time job. Maintaining the cloud infrastructure, which is designed for rapid change, let's remember, can be challenging. So we address this with continuous optimization. So we use our in-house expertise backed up by a key tool set delivered to us through Current Technologies Surpass Optimo platform to keep our client subscriptions nice and clean and healthy. You can see our approach here on the slide. On a regular basis, we're going to scan and analyze the cloud infrastructure estate to identify orphan resources, maybe disks, maybe IP addresses, that sort of stuff, could be costing you money each month, and provide guidance around cost savings based on the deployed workloads that you've got. Maybe some virtual machine size changes, or maybe some reserved instance opportunities that are in there, simple size switching, that sort of stuff. We take this then a little bit further and highlight any resources deployed that may deviate from the agreed security and governance policies that we put in place, and then ensure that appropriate actions can be taken to address that. We wrap the whole thing up into a monthly report, and then where desired and appropriate, we can execute the remediation steps as well. So maybe resizing a machine, maybe deleting those orphan disks, maybe enabling secure transfers on a storage group, whatever it may be. Again, I'd be happy to explore that in more detail on a one-to-one basis. Just give us a shout after the webinar. So just to summarize, I've spoken a little bit around the challenges we face with cost management and standardization, some of the options we use, both Azure options and partner technologies to manage the cloud infrastructure through policy, templates, resource groups, management groups, and all that good stuff, and talked a little bit about our continuous optimization approach. So thanks for listening to me. Again, please do reach out to me if you'd like to know any more detail from what I've spoken about today. And at this point, I'd like to hand over to Jeremy from Current Technology. Jeremy, over to you.
Thanks, Liam. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be with you today. I'm Jeremy Neal. I manage the Current Technology business here in the UK. Just by way of introduction, Vim, I'm hoping that you can confirm you can see my screen. We've just done a little hand over there.
Yeah, that looks good.
Great, thank you. So Current Technology is a software business. We're a global organization headquartered in the USA. I'm part of the EMEA team. I look after the business, as I say, here in the UK, and we develop technology, as Vim has already explained, that is used by service providers and specialists in cloud services like BlueSource to help customers make the most of the cloud computing opportunity. So that's us, that's what we do. Our platform is called Surpass. So this is the software that we develop, and that is delivered as software as a service. It runs on the cloud, and our service providers and BlueSource use that in the way that Vim has described to really deliver two core opportunities to you as customers. The first is what you can think of as before the cloud, which is the workloads and the migration analysis that Vim referred to before. That's not the focus for today. The focus for today is the second part, which is the on the cloud piece, and that is through this platform Surpass and a component of it that we call Continuo, and we're going to look at that in more detail in a moment. But before we do, I think one of the key advantages of working with Surpass is that because it deals with both of these elements, the migration to the cloud and then the optimization and improvement, continuous improvement on the cloud, it lets us collectively, that's us as Current, BlueSource, and you as the customer, enjoy the greatest flexibility, and what the phrase that I like to use is freedom of movement in terms of how and where you choose to affect the changes and the improvements that you would like to see as part of your growing usage and reliance upon cloud services. So as you can see from the screen that we have in front of us here, with our analysis and migration capability, we can, if you have the time within that migration window, we can do all of the refactoring and rehosting and so forth that Vim has already explained. But not everybody has that time, and not everybody has the opportunity to do those things within that window. Because we have the same capabilities on the cloud, you can do that improvement and modernization in your own time when you're actually on the cloud. So some of our users and some of our customers are doing a fairly straightforward lift and shift to get them out of an existing estate and up to the cloud, and they can then begin the process of modernization and optimization from that point forward. Other people are doing that within that digital transformation and migration window. So there's flexibility there, which is one of the key benefits that we offer. So that's the Surpass capability all up. As I mentioned, we're going to focus on the cloud part of this, and we're going to be, as part of that, working largely with Microsoft's Azure platform. Veeam's already been demonstrating that to you. We work very closely with the cloud providers. We are a Microsoft partner, and the Surpass platform has been accredited by Microsoft for both the assessment and the migration part of their Azure Migrate motion, for example. But we are agnostic. So we have a similar capability with AWS and other cloud vendors as well. So that's us. That's the very high level overview of the Surpass platform. And then just to re-emphasize, Veeam's already made this point in his, the sort of closing remarks in his section, but just to restate, why is it, why should you be optimizing your cloud account? What are the reasons for that? And I think it's really twofold. Firstly, the cloud by its very nature is flexible and agile. And that's a good thing, because what it means is that you can spin up new services very quickly. Those can be used to test new ideas in business, to respond to new opportunities in business in a very agile way. And that's part of the benefit that the market enjoys in working with cloud services, is it gives you that that fleet of foot, that ability to respond and to create new services very quickly. Definitely part of one of the key benefits of working with cloud platforms today. The challenge that brings is in the housekeeping side, and Veeam's covered this, so I won't really go into that in too much detail, except to say that what that might mean for some organizations is that certain cloud services are left running, and you are continuing to pay for them without them necessarily still being used or delivering value to you as an organization. And that is a challenge that is quite common because of that very flexibility and agility that is part and parcel of how the cloud platforms work. So that's a reality for pretty much everybody that's already using cloud services. Is, have I got redundancy up there that I could perhaps do a better job of closing down and making sure that my costs are aligned accordingly. But I think probably the bigger reason is that the cloud vendors themselves, both individually, although this depicts this as a very dynamic and competitive market, which of course it is, but even on their own, the cloud vendors are incredibly innovative, and the pace and the scale of new product and new service development by Microsoft, by Amazon, by Google is incredible. And again, Veeam's already referenced the fact that if you had designed and built a cloud platform perhaps 6 months or even 3 months ago, the chances are that by now innovation from within those vendors, and particularly because of the dynamic and competitive market that exists between them, will have meant that new products and services are available to you that quite possibly offer a better option in terms of the compute horsepower that you need, the storage that you need, at either the same sort of cost or perhaps even a reduced cost of service. So you've always got the opportunity to both look at your own internal housekeeping of the cloud platform that you're working with, how that's evolving, is that being well managed, but also, are there changes in the marketplace that give me the opportunity to move to a better service and therefore save cost? So that's really the context as to why the optimization of your cloud account is important. And that's where we provide the Surpass platform for our service providers and for BlueSource. And that, in the broadest sense, covers the infrastructure as a service layer, it covers the application layer, and it covers, to some extent, the work that you might be doing with products at the SaaS layer. So we, as well as migrating applications to the cloud, and as well as optimizing your cloud spend, we also have capability to reposition and repurpose and redeliver applications as SaaS without changing the code. And within our platform, we have the wherewithal to do that and to manage that for you on an ongoing basis. But for today, we're going to look at and focus on the infrastructure side of your cloud platform. And that's the opportunity to continually assess and continually optimize the resources that you're consuming so that your cost is managed as effectively as possible. So within that overall set of products, the one that we're going to be looking at is Optimo. So Optimo offers continuous infrastructure optimization. It plugs into your cloud account. It looks at your consumption and billing data and compares that to the catalog of products and services that are available from your cloud provider to see where there might be opportunities for you to take a different set of options and in so doing to save cost. Optimo itself works across a range of different layers of capability. As I said, it plugs into your cloud account, and from there it will do that comparison. So it will look at the services that you're consuming, it will look at the costs of those services, it will compare what you have and the catalog that is now available from your service provider to see, are there options where, you know, with a single click, I could move, let's say, to a different service, a different virtual machine, a different storage option, and save money. At a very simple level, that is the proposition. That is what BlueSource can do for you using Optimo to continually manage and assess the health and the state of the cloud account that you're using. As part of that, they can also visualize the architecture that you're working with. So we provide a three-dimensional and a two-dimensional way to explore and visually appreciate what you're using, and that is often how debugging of a cloud account can take place. So you may identify resources that have been left orphaned, are no longer being used, and clearly that's an opportunity to say, well, you know, here's something that could be stopped and decommissioned to save money. As I've mentioned, this is a platform that is agnostic. So whereas we do this analysis largely in context of today's conversation for Microsoft Azure, if you're also using AWS, or if you use AWS today and you're thinking of moving to Azure, then you can use the platform to give you that same level of insight and opportunity to make changes in exactly the same way. So to summarize, what we've got here is a platform that is looking at what you're consuming right now. It's looking at what's available, and it will come up with a series of what we call advisories. These are notes to you and to the team at BlueSource to say, here's something that on the face of it we would like you to investigate further, that merits some investigation because there's the potential there to save money. This is done in a way that it's fully secure. It contains a full audit log so that all of the changes that are made are recorded, and it will give you a well-managed score to, if you like, benchmark the cloud platform that you have and the design that you're working with against industry standards. So that's what Optimo does all up. Let's just have a quick look now at some of the outputs that generates, and then that will hopefully bring this to life for you and give you an idea of the sorts of ways in which these recommendations and these advisories are presented, and therefore the opportunity that you and your team at BlueSource will have to make improvements and to continuously optimize. This is an opportunity that we believe represents the means, the wherewithal to save up to 30% on an ongoing basis of the cloud costs that you're incurring today. So it begins with a dashboard view. So having plugged in to your account, we will then synchronize, bring that data through, do that analysis, look at all of the ways in which we think there are opportunities to make changes, to save money, optimize the estate you're working with, and we represent that in terms of the cost you're incurring today, and then a proposed cost. And the proposed cost is what you would be paying if you act on all of those advisories. And you can see in this example, that's a roughly 25% saving. And you've got information based on the current month and over the period of a year. So at a dashboard level, you've got an instant appreciation of how much money and how much of a percent in terms of your cost could be saved. That is presented also for the current billing cycle, so we can synchronize on both of those, and it will show you what you could achieve within the current billing cycle, making those changes today if that was something that you decided to go ahead and do. You can also apply thresholds on your spend that will drive alerts if you are going to go above the threshold. These are all ways of helping you understand, manage, and make your cloud costs both more efficient and also more predictable. Beyond the dashboard view, we provide then a variety of outputs that again give an idea and an insight into what is going on within the cloud account that you're running today. So initially, we look at the quota utilization. So depending on the subscription type you have, your cloud provider will allocate you a certain number of resources that are available to you for you to use. In this example, this is quite small, so the numbers are relatively low compared with the full amount that are available. But this will immediately give you a heads-up view of the resources that you're using today versus the threshold in terms of the quota that is available to you. So in a much larger deployment, you might find that you're up against a limit for a certain type of cloud service, and that might be the point at which it would be appropriate to look at increasing that quota. And then alongside that, you've got a summary of all of the advisories that Optimo has produced based on the data that it's taken from your cloud account and the opportunities it has found to make changes, and by making those changes, save money. So you can see here, there's outputs around virtual machines, storage accounts, the PaaS layer, availability sets, virtual networks, and so on. So all of that is summarized and broken down so that you can instantly get a feel for where those opportunities lie. And then just to finish off and show you how that information is then delivered at an individual cloud service category by category layer. This is the sort of information that will then be delivered in Optimo. So firstly, beginning with virtual machines. So we call these VM flavor statistics. And what you get is a summary of the number of virtual machines that you have running, whether they are in a, or that you have commissioned, whether they are in a running or a stopped state. And then you get these advisories and more details. So the advisory for optimization are where we have found alternatives that might be used to give you, as I say, either an equivalent configuration, an equivalent flavor that might be available today at a reduced cost, or perhaps an improved and higher specification, even at a reduced cost. That's the sort of opportunity that always exists simply because of that innovation that I talked about before. So these advisories are available within the Optimo interface, and you can, and you know, this is what BlueSource will do. They can act on those immediately for you to realize that change and to deliver that saving in cost straight away. You can see the cost summaries are given at the region level, and you can have multiple regions. Some organizations are deploying just to one cloud region. Others, larger, perhaps with more complex needs, will be using multiple cloud regions, and you can have all of those regions covered within the single Optimo deployment. So you've got information on saving potential within the regions, across the individual VMs here. The same applies at the storage level. So in this instance, we're looking at the number of storage services that you have commissioned and that you're consuming, whether those are premium or standard, and again, the cost associated with those and advisories for optimization, changes that you can make instantly through a simple number of clicks. The same then applies at the PaaS layer. If you're already consuming PaaS services, then we will analyze, interrogate, and report back on those. In this instance, in terms of both the number of Azure SQL databases and MySQL databases that are in play, and also the cost that you're incurring for those, and where those costs differ, sorry, or are, shall we say, out of step with the latest that are available from your cloud provider. That again is where we'll provide that opportunity to make that change. You've then got also information on public IP distribution. That may be something that in context of your quota you need to manage and ensure unassigned IP addresses are dealt with, and obviously that opportunity is there as well. You've got a visualization of the resource groups. Veeam's also talked about this. So optimization of this and visualization, eyeballing what is there, is something you can do very easily within Optimo itself. And then lastly, as I've mentioned, we have this multi-dimensional cloud view, and this can be explored in either three-dimensional view, as you've seen in the example on the screen here, or two-dimensional. And it depends on your preferences to which of those you might use. But it's a great way of visually exploring the cloud architecture and the service consumption that is in play. And all of the advisories are available within this view. So you can still do this exploration and determine what opportunities exist to save cost. You can filter this so that you can say, I just want to see the VMs, or I just want to see the network interfaces. We have found that enterprise architects with responsibility for managing complex cloud platforms really get value out of this, because it's a great way, it's a unique way actually for them to be able to explore and see what is there. So just in summary then, Optimo delivered by BlueSource lets you enjoy continuous monitoring and optimization of your cloud account. It gives you these actionable advisories to realize cost savings across the board. It helps make sure that industry best practice for infrastructure optimization is there, and something that will benefit your use of the cloud. As I've already mentioned, in our experience, this is an opportunity that possibly represents up to a 30% month-on-month saving on typical cloud costs where you have deployed continuous optimization using Optimo, and it has that full audit trail. So with that, I hope that's been of use and of interest to you, and thanks for your time. I'm going to hand back now to Veeam and the team at BlueSource.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy. I'm conscious we're at the top of the hour now, so I think we've got a bit of echoes there. Brilliant. If someone wants to just go on to mute. Thank you very much, everybody. What we have as we switch over between comments back to Veeam, I do get a bit of echo there. How can BlueSource help? We've got some packaged up services that enable you to quickly understand what's going on with your existing cloud platform, how they're configured against best practices. We can understand potential security concerns with that current configuration. We can understand the potential cost savings. Jeremy talked about 30% there. That is absolutely achievable. Speak to us about that. And we looked at through realizing what resources are configured and optimized, and any potential, using the templates as well. And the output is an assessment report discussing and making those recommendations as well. So, we've got some packaged up services for you to quickly gain critical advantage. And I believe also, I'm just hearing we've got a couple of questions as well. So Veeam, would you like to just quickly put those a couple of questions up?
Yeah, so we had a question. So Jeremy, this is probably one for you. What is the lead time to align Optimo to newly released services from the cloud providers?
Thanks for that. So we update our knowledge base and the information that we store on the cloud providers on a very regular basis, at minimum weekly. So that there will always be a slight lag, but only very slight in terms of the new releases that are made available by the cloud providers and the representation of that in Optimo.
Great, Jeremy. VM, any other questions? Conscious of time, though.
I think that's all that I haven't replied to directly now.
Superb. So as I said, BlueSource can provide full 24/7 management whilst providing backup, DR and business continuity to all your on-premise, hybrid and cloud journeys. So to keep you secure and compliant whilst controlling costs. So please reach out to your account management team. You've got some email addresses up on the screen. Thank you so much for attending. And if there are any questions, please reach out to us through the normal communication channels. And look, we look forward to working with all of you. Please stay safe. And Jeremy, VM, thank you very much for your time. And thank you, everybody, and have a good day. Thank you, everybody.